Hi, everyone. This is the seventh and last lecture of week 3. And again, as before, you can listen to this as an audio, and it would be best if you read Genesis 17, which is what I'm going to talk about right now, the assigned biblical text, before you listen to this lecture. Okay. So in Genesis 17, again, part of a cycle of stories about Abram, the first patriarch of Israel, we have now another affirmation of the Abrahamic covenant, and again, a repetition of what it entails, right? Which is namely, as I talked about before, progeny, land, and a kind of special relationship with God that will be passed on to a chosen or elect son, okay? We also get two other things that further kind of ratify or affirm the covenant in this chapter, okay? In Genesis 17. Notice how many times the biblical writer wants to ratify or affirm the covenant as if the covenant is under threat or they're kind of insecure about it, okay? So anyways, back to Genesis 17. Okay, the first thing you get to reaffirm the covenant or to kind of affirm the covenant more so in this chapter is a name change. So this is where Abram's name, which means exalted or high father, Av means father, and the Ram, Rum means to be high or elevated, is changed to Abraham. Okay, Abraham, which sounds like the phrase ancestor or father of many or multitudes. Just a quick note about names and name changes and name explanations in the biblical text. A lot of times the text will give you false explanations of names. They will say, well, so-and-so was renamed or named, so-and-so because of this, and they'll give you kind of a reason. And a lot of these are fake, okay? So what I mean by that is the biblical text doesn't really know, the biblical writers don't really know why the person is named that. They're just kind of filling in information using wordplay later, okay? Now with Abraham, it does very much, his name does very much sounds like the father of many, so I don't know, maybe it's real here, I don't know, okay. As I stated in previous videos, names were, of course, not just names in the Hebrew Bible, okay? They were not, like in the modern world, arbitrary designations, but implied or said something essential about a person, okay? And so if I said something was a tree, there was something essentially tree-y about a tree, okay? The name also entailed, because names signify something essential about a person, you had power over a person if you knew their names, because you kind of knew something that made them who they are, okay? And remember, we still kind of have this, the story of Rumpelstiltskin, okay? And you'll see when we get to maybe Exodus 3, for example, and this may be why God is so reluctant to give out his name, okay? There's power in the name, okay? Now, what this means for Abraham now, is that, of course, that his name change means that something essential about him has changed, okay? And that therefore he's now been transformed into a being that is ready for, and indeed is the father of many, okay? And to help transition Abram to becoming Abraham, the father of many, God adds a kind of different second additional, I guess, condition to the covenant. Something that Abraham and his descendants, male descendants, going forward are now supposed to do, okay? Which is that they're supposed to mark the covenant on their bodies somehow to tell or show God that they are indeed part of the Abrahamic covenant. And this is found in Genesis 17, verse 9 and forward, okay? God said to Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. Throughout your generations, every male among you shall be circumcised when he is 8 days old, including the slave born in your house, and the one bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offspring. Both the slave born in your house and the one bought with your money must be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of the foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Circumcision is very strange. Okay, so lots of questions here. Why would God choose this act, circumcision, as the sign of the covenant, which is what the text tells you over and over again? Notice how repetitive this chapter is. Okay, indeed, this word sign, sign of the covenant in verse 11 is the same word used to talk about the bow, the rainbow, the bow after the flood. Right. And of course, once you realize that this is the same word, the questions change, but ever so slightly. Why would God need a sign or another kind of post-it note, reminder note to remember, so that he can remember that he made a deal with Abraham? Why does God need to look down an Israelite man's pants to remember that he is, oh, right, part of the Israelite, of course, later Jewish people? Okay. And also, and relatedly, what about women then? Women cannot be circumcised, okay? So does that mean that they are not part of the chosen group, not part of the Abrahamic covenant? Okay, all these are excellent questions, and I don't have the answers to some of them, but I will tell you what I know. If you read the chapter from Eilburg Schwartz's book that I assigned you, you will find out some interesting things about circumcision. Okay. Mainly, the Israelites were not the only ones who circumcised their male members. Rather, it was something that was done throughout the Middle East and parts of Africa. So why do people do this? Well, according to Eilburg Schwartz, it's because, circumcision was supposed to make the male more virile, more able to be reproductively successful. Okay. He writes that circumcision is a lot of times likened to the pruning of trees, okay, to make it more fruit-bearing, okay, again, more reproductive. Okay. Indeed, there's some argument that a circumcised penis looks more erect, okay, and therefore looks more fertile, and maybe that played a part in the kind of use of circumcision. Okay. Hence, in this chapter, it makes sense that God now would command Abraham and his family to circumcise. This is right before, as we'll know, Abraham will bear a child with Sarah, the child that will carry on the Abrahamic promise. Okay, and of course, this is right after or right alongside his name change, which in essence changes him. Okay. And remember that the Abrahamic covenant promised very certain things. It was centered on God's increase of Abraham's descendants. Okay, that is, it's supposed to, the fact that circumcision would be sort of used here makes sense, because of course that also is part of this preparation for Abraham to get ready to reproduce these descendants. Okay, now if you think all this is weird, kind of is, I will say that boys in the United States for a long time were routinely circumcised, and the reasons given for why they should be circumcised are also, let's say, as highly speculative as the reasons for why young boys were circumcised in the ancient world. Namely, sort of in the modern world, circumcision was supposed to keep a boy from, it was equated with purity, and it was supposed to keep boys from masturbating too much. So, it's not just ancient people that made up reasons for this. Okay, going on. There is something strange about Israelite circumcision, or that marks it as different from other circumcision that you find throughout the world. And it's the fact that the person, the young male child, is so young when he is circumcised. Usually, because circumcision was supposed to make a man or a male more fertile, it was done right before a male child turned into a man and got married. So right around adolescence or puberty. Okay, and you see this being reflected in the biblical text. So in Genesis 17, verse 25, it tells you that Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar, and notice Ishmael seems to be 13 now, okay, that he is 13 years old when he is circumcised. He's really the kind of usual age that young men in the Mediterranean world were circumcised. Okay. So what's strange is, or the question is, well, why do the Israelites circumcise their children so young? 8 days old is pretty, pretty new to show how fertile this child is going to be, okay? One explanation we don't really know is that circumcision was seen as apotropic, and this is a fancy word for warding off evil, purifying perhaps, okay? Notice that the blood in the biblical text is powerful, okay? Blood in the right place, blood in place, be it poured out onto the ground as part of a sacrifice, is good, is protected, okay? And blood out of place, however, for example, when Cain murders his brother, is bad and has negative effects, okay? Some scholars wonder if childbirth, because it involves blood and other body fluids, was seen as impure, okay? And that circumcision somehow was seen as, because it entailed blood in place, a kind of quasi-sacrifice, not clear, circumcision somehow lessened this impurity of childbirth, okay? You see this reflected a little bit in this very mysterious, and we don't really know what it means, law or commandment in Leviticus 12:5, okay? And again, the sacrificial laws, the Levitical laws, are not in place by the time of Abraham, but sometimes the biblical text writers don't remember this. They refer to the sacrifice as if it's already in place, okay? Leviticus 12:5 states that when a woman gives birth to a female child, that she will be impure for 2 weeks, again, because of the blood and body fluids out of place. However, when a male child is born, the mother is only impure for half that time, only a week. And think about what happens after a week. The male child would be circumcised, right? So some wonder if the blood of the circumcision is why the woman is impure for a shorter period of time, that somehow it acts as a purifier of some sort, okay? Speaking of women and circumcision, and maybe Abrahamic covenant, the text in Genesis 17 seems to have rather mixed feelings about women and the covenant, okay? The fact that only males can be circumcised seems to make it appear as if women were, maybe subsidiary members of the promise, not really members of the promise, as if women, it didn't matter who they are, okay? Indeed, at other parts of the Hebrew Bible, it seems to imply that women were kind of like blank slates. They didn't have an identity, they didn't have an ethnicity, apart from, their husband, okay? They were kind of empty vases. At other points, including in chapter 17, again, there's a kind of ambivalent vision of women, okay? The vision, the biblical writer seems to think slightly differently of women, okay? So look at verse 15 of this chapter, okay? God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. So notice that Sarah also, like Abraham, gets a name change. Interestingly, her name, the meaning of her name doesn't seem to change very much. I think it means my princess or the princess, okay? I will bless her, going onwards, I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, can a child be born to a man who's 100 years old? I mean, can Sarah, who is 90, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live in your sight. So notice what's happening. Abraham hears that Sarah's going to give birth, and he starts laughing. He cracks up and says, oh, yeah, right. Oh, God, here's my other son, Ishmael. Okay. Verse 19, God said, no, but your wife Sarah shall bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac. And we'll get to what Isaac's name means, but one meaning of his name is laughter. Okay, again, because in this case, Abraham laughs. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I've heard you. I will bless him and make him fruitful and exceedingly numerous. He shall be a father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at the season next year. And when he had finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. Notice how ambivalent Genesis 17 is. It gives you circumcision as a marker of the covenant, something that could be only done on men, as if women, the identity of the women do not matter. And yet at the end of chapter 17, it seems to flip. And it says, no, who the mother is does matter. It's not going to be Ishmael, okay? It has to be Sarah's son, Isaac. Okay, and maybe even in Genesis 17, you can kind of detect a reason for why Ishmael was rejected as the bearer of the Abrahamic promise. Well, why? Well, because he was circumcised at the wrong time. He was not circumcised on the 8th day. Well, you can say, well, he didn't know about it. Well, tough. Okay. So again, mixed feelings, unsurprisingly, that the biblical writers have about women. Indeed, as I hope you have noticed, the biblical text is really complicated, right? There's lots of different ideas, lots of different thoughts, which is why it makes it so hard and challenging and fun, I think, to think about, what the Bible really actually says and what they mean. Okay, thanks for watching, and we will continue on with Abraham and the other patriarchs in the next week.